members, we have a quorum, and I call to order the meeting. We are now on the emergency exemption from statutory requirements COVID-19 regulation. We started clause by clause examination last time, so we'll continue with that. But first of all, can I ask the administration? Last time members asked various questions. Do you have any supplementary reply? So first, I would like to ask the administration if they have anything to add. And of course, if members wish to ask questions, you could raise hand. First, the administration, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. After the last meeting, we received 2 letters from the Secretariat to ask for further information. So on the 14th and the 15th of March, we submitted some information. I will go through that briefly. First letter, 2 questions were asked. That is under the vaccine pass requirement, what about the guidelines on the collection of personal information by Primus managers? Now, there are certain requirements of Primus managers, staff members, and visitors in relation to the vaccine pass. Under these requirements, the Primus managers may have to take active actions to check vaccine pass. That means they have to scan the QR code of the vaccination record. But if there is no such record electronically, then for those with written record or medical exemption, or for children under 12, then the names, phone numbers, and the date and time of entry to the premises for these people have to be recorded and kept for 31 days. And there is also a link to give a list of information that needs to be collected from visitors. Another question is about the registration of proprietary Chinese medicine for treating COVID-19. Now, under the support and with the assistance of the central authorities, there are 3 types of proprietary Chinese medicine being donated or procured for use in Hong Kong. So for people who are under the Stay Home Safe scheme, and then or for those in community isolation facilities and so on, or at our designated clinics, and this medicines are distributed. And we've made special arrangement for the use of these medication. Now, with the delivery coming from the managing authorities, we can ensure the quality of these medicines. And then we will, if the public are to procure such medicines, they should buy from reliable sources. They shouldn't buy from uncertain sources. Of course, we've heard members' views too. We will follow up on your suggestions. The second letter that we responded to was the one issued on the 15th. That's a list of questions from a member of the public. First, for those who've recovered from COVID-19, what sort of what is the vaccination arrangement in relation to the vaccine pass? Now, we have only given some advice recently, and then for someone who's had 1 or 2 doses of vaccine before infection, there's no need for them to take the 3rd dose. I'm not going to go into details, but of course there are plenty of details. But anyway, how do we confirm, or how do we get issue a certificate to confirm that, well, maybe we need to work on the arrangement? Second question is about the rapid antigen test kits. As we know, the new arrangement is someone tests positive with RAT, then that's considered a confirmed case. And then they could go to the declaration system online And there's now a requirement by the Department of Health that the person has to declare the RAT positive result either same day or day following. Otherwise, the declaration is invalid. And then with such declaration arrangement, then isolation or quarantine orders could be issued to the persons concerned, and then the relevant proof will be provided. So that's all from us. Thank you. Thank you, Under Secretary. So far, 6 members have indicated they wish to speak. I'll read out the order. Ms. Elizabeth Kwok, Mr. Edward Leung, Ms. Carmen Can, or Mr. Lam first, and then Ms. Carmen Can, then Ms. Doreen Kong and myself. 3 minutes each, please. Ms. Kwok, Elizabeth Kwok. Thank you. On the reply given to us by the administration and on what the Undersecretary just said now, you actually have not addressed the issues we raised at the last meeting. We do know that there is exemption now for use of some of the proprietary Chinese medicines donated by the mainland central authorities. Then there are bodies who have gotten hold of proprietary Chinese medicine not donated by the central authorities, but they are still the 3 types of proprietary Chinese medicines used on the mainland for treatment of COVID-19. So some groups have bought such medicine for the donation to the public, but then these drugs are not given exemption. We're talking about the original, well, these are actually the original PCM, although it's not the Hong Kong version. And I think such versions should also be given exemption so they could be given out to the public. Of course, it's good that the central authorities are donating PCM to us, but then there are local groups who are able to procure such medicine and they want to contribute. So why can't they get exemption as long as these are the real PCM? So I hope the administration won't just keep saying that you will consider it, you follow up on our views. Now we have already made suggestions to you, but you're considering them, you're not following on them. So won't the PCM we have at hand go to waste, or are we going to risk breaking the law in giving out such a PCM to the public? That's the first point. Second point, apart from PCMs, proprietary Chinese medicines, many Chinese medicine practitioners are telling us that there are various prescriptions, granules and pills and so on. There are problems with custom clearance. There's a backlog of such drugs with customs clearance, they can't get to Hong Kong. So I hope you will attach importance to the use of Chinese medicine for treating COVID patients. In fact, on the mainland, for most confirmed cases, the treatment involves only Chinese medicine, but not any dedicated COVID Western medicine, and still the country has a low fatality rate. So that shows the approach on the mainland is working well, is also internationally recognized. Therefore, we ask that you attach importance to the resources we have. Now, apart from granting exemption to the PCMs we have, please try to help to make sure such a PCMs could come to Hong Kong. Okay, you've just used up your time, but still, I will be, I will allow some leeway. So, Undersecretary, your response, please. Now, there are many approved PCMs on the mainland. Now the public have procured them for distribution. So what are the difficulties with clearing such medication? So if you could give explanation to questions, it will help to avoid misunderstanding. Yes, Madam Chair, last time I made it clear. We're talking about drugs approved by the National Medical Products Administration, not just any drug. So how come these cannot be given approval to come to Hong Kong? Yes, please give us targeted reply. We're giving you a chance to give us explanation because there are public grievances. So can you tell us why you think this cannot be done? And now people have bought PCMs, but they can't distribute them. So what would you propose that they do with the PCMs? Could you be more specific in your reply? Thank you, Madam Chair. First, we very much agree. The National Health Commission and its COVID-19 treatment handbook already includes such PCMs for the treatment of mild symptoms in the early stage. So we certainly believe that the PCMs have good efficacy. But then, and we must thank many community groups for buying and distributing medication to people. But then I must stress that we're talking about medication after all, so we have to proceed with caution. That's why we have a registration system, because we need to ensure quality and safety of drug. This is a way to minimize risks. For medication approved in other places, of course, we are aware of members' repeated views on such matter. It's not that we're not following up on that, but rather we have to consider very carefully the issues. Now, if we're talking about medicines that have been approved in other places, how do we allow them to come to Hong Kong? And on the market, there are different shops selling different forms of the medication. How do the public find out whether the medication is suitable for them? So we have to be very careful. We just need time to come up with some prudent approach to deal with the matter. Thank you. Next, Mr. Edward Leung. Thank you. Madam Chair, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Madam Chair and Undersecretary. Our first request is, of course, for the government to deal with mild cases and reduce the number of severe and death cases. And the second thing is we need to make sure there is dignity for the deceased. Now, we have read media reports that their bodies left in the, on the theater, in the surgery room or in wards. Some have passed away for over 10 years. The bodies were still left in the room. So we've seen many of such cases. And then there are photos circulating that there are many bags suspected to have bodies in them just left on the floor in the hospital, and there are tens of such bags. We know that the hospitals need to provide more refrigerated containers to provide more storage space for bodies, but at the same time you need to speed up the formalities. I understand many family members of the deceased would like to proceed with the funeral arrangement as soon as possible, but then it seems that the coroners are being slower than usual in issuing death certificates. And so is it because you don't have enough manpower to issue death certificate, you don't have enough forensic scientists, or you don't have enough coroners? So how can you speed up all these formalities? Can you issue a guideline so that the death certificate must be issued within a specific time frame? Because this is about showing respect to the deceased. Thank you.
Undersecretary, can you expedite the whole process, please? Can you let the public know? Thank you, Chair. Ms. Leung referred to those pictures showing situation in hospitals. It was really said at a press briefing that this once did happen, and it was really undesirable to handle patients who passed away in that manner, and they had to pacify the feelings of patients as well. So the situation should be improved as soon as possible. Now, after a person has passed away, there are statutory procedures and storage procedures to go through, and also cremation. For different cases, there might be bottleneck. We're grateful to information provided by Mr. Leung. Is may be the case that the signing of certificates is a bit slower for some cases. We will discuss with relevant departments to find out the situation, to see whether it is indeed true and whether there are ways to further compress the time for handling the bodies. Thank you. Ms. Carmen Ken. Thank you, Madam. Undersecretary, on the 5th of March, in the government's press release, it was said that although public health crisis has impact on the life and death of members of the public, and we must act expeditiously. And then for every measure taken, there should be sound legal backing. So we are now vetting relevant subsidiary legislation under Cap 599, in particular 241N on emergency regulations ordinance. We want to cooperate with the government so that in this warlike state, when you have to act expeditiously, we want to support you. Secretary, I hope you understand that we would like to see how we can further empower the government. What you said was a progress. You were able to respond to questions of concern to members, and such as given blanket approval for related drugs. We want you to expedite the whole process. You mentioned last time that apart from exempting the 450,000 items of medicine from the central government, you said that you were concerned about public health and whether there were concerns with the wholesalers. So we have considered Cap 241N. Can exemption be provided under law? Perhaps DOJ can help us to study this. We're going to study the legislation clause by clause, but before we do that, I'd like to talk about the overall policy. And when we are studying the legislation by clause, and I will talk about specifics. Now, under the ordinance, there are exemptions under Section 2(3) to allow the CS4A to provide exemptions. But what about legal liabilities arising for people to act under the regulation? Will they be exempted from legal liabilities so that people can be assured? The exemption granted by the government may affect the agent of the drug. Can we say that an exemption under this will exempt liability of persons, whether it is about a breach of contract or a statute, or negligence, or tort? Can we give exemption for persons who act under this regulation so that we can remove the restrictions and constraints? Can the DOJ take this into account in the drafting of the regulation? Undersecretary and also DOJ, please respond briefly. I think Madam Khan would like us to provide more exemption or assurance in the regulation. Now we have to consider very carefully, in particular, for exemption from registration of Chinese proprietary medicine. So for different cases and circumstances and the scope of exemption, we may not be able to go into details in this meeting. Now, how can we ensure that different sources of Chinese proprietary medicine can be used in Hong Kong, we have to think more carefully. Secretary, my suggestion doesn't confine to medicine alone. It's just an illustration. We should fully utilize this regulation. Now, this regulation gives us exemption from statutory requirements, including a requirement for license, authority, permit, etc. But the exemption stops there. We have to assure the CS4A and everyone in the community. Now, if they act according to exemption granted under this regulation, will that cause a failure in the compliance of contracts, etc.? Can we exempt people from liability arising from acting under this exemption as well? All right, so we have 450,000 items donated by the central authorities, but legislators and the community know that there are other sources of input because the importation of such drugs may have implications for the distributors. Do you get my point? I think, Ms. Khan, your question is very clear. Under Secretary, can you please respond briefly? And if we have the chance, we can revisit this point. When we vet the legislation, you can follow up. Follow up, please, Under Secretary. I think I got Ms. Khan's point, but then I am a layman in law, so I may not be able to respond very accurately, but I can take this back to the DOJ. DOJ, I think you should not be so narrow. You should adopt a purposeful approach. You want to remove the red tape and the various constraints. There can be various implications. DOJ, anyone from the DOJ here? Thank you. Just a minor supplement. Now, if we exempt a certain person from fulfilling statutory requirements, then that means the liability arising from that is also exempted. But for more comprehensive exemption, then there needs to be further consideration. So the exemption applies to persons, not really objects and projects, etc., can also benefit from the exemption. And Mr. Lam Chit Yun. Thank you. Dr. David Lam. Yes, we understand that the two oral drugs for treating COVID have arrived, and even elderly care homes can prescribe oral drugs if deemed appropriate. But then we don't have enough manpower to ensure that the oral drugs can be prescribed to elderly persons, because we know that to be effective, the drugs have to be administered within 5 days of onset. So if doctors cannot ensure that drugs can be prescribed for residents in elderly care homes within the first 5 days, what we can do? And there are complaints that relatives of the deceased were not able to claim the bodies even after a long time. Can you tell the public the clear procedures for applying for a death certificate? And can there be performance pledge on fulfilling of each stage? And can there be a hotline to answer inquiries from members of the public? Thank you. Now, Dr. Lam, his question is about giving oral medicine to residents of elderly care homes. I think one way to prescribe the drugs is through outreaching medical teams to care homes, because most elderly care homes are served by outreaching teams. The oral drugs have to be administered within 5 days of onset to be effective. So we will follow up to ensure that people who should be given the drugs can do so during the critical period. And as for the issue of death certificates, usually, if not for the current COVID crisis, the issue of death certificate is is something rather standardized. But then now the forensic procedures may be needed now. As for the time required for each step, I can go back and check. And if I spot any bottleneck, we'll see whether there is any way to deal with that bottleneck and compress the time for the issue of the death certificate. Oh, you have a follow-up? I'm from FEHD. On the handling of bodies, the Department of Health, the Hospital Authority, and the FEHD have all along maintained close liaison with the funeral sector. There are two routes normally. One is through hospitals, and the second is through the malls. Now, it is for the doctor to sign the cause of death in hospital. When it is in a public mall, then forensic examination is required. And so the procedures have to be fulfilled. So the two have different handling time. We've been discussing with the funeral service sector. Now, there must be sufficient slots for cremation. The FEHD has boosted the number of slots from 130 or 140 per day to 260 to 280 slots per day. It takes about 2 to 3 days for the certificate on cause of death to be issued. And then we're going to discuss with the forensic department to see how the process can be expedited. So we have held 2 web workshops. In the coming couple of days, we're going to discuss with the front line of the funeral service sector. So when we had a surge in the number of dead bodies in hospitals and in our public malls, things have greatly improved over time. Most of the corpses have been handled, and we will let the sector know our progress so that through the sector, family members can understand the process.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick follow-up? Yes, please. Now, I know colleagues are trying very hard to compress the time frame, but I would like the administration to make sure there's transparency and that the public would know how far their cases are, and then there are ways for them to make inquiries. And then you also make it very clear what the flow is for the public. Well, yes, we could work on the workflow and then explain the details. Now, members are concerned that for family members or the sector where if it's possible to have a more transparent mechanism so they would know about the progress. Well, we go back to talk to the relevant departments and the hospital authority to see if there are better ways to handle these cases. Next, Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the Undersecretary. For elderly residents in residential care homes for the elderly, can they take the Lanhua Qingwen granules or capsules given by the central authorities? I received a request for assistance yesterday. It's a mild case involving an elderly person. The family members know that elderly person is of the hot nature, and so they immediately sent the Lanhua granules to him, but then the home refused to accept it because they said there's no instructions from the Department of Health, and so they wouldn't give the patient the medicine, the home resident medicine. And then today, the condition of the patient has deteriorated. The second faint line is starting to show, and then so family members ask what can be done, and then the home say, well, nothing can be done. If the condition worsens, then the person will send to the hospital. So it seems that there are no ways to stop mild cases from deteriorating into severe cases. And that seems to be what we're doing. We're, turning mild cases into severe cases for the elderly. So as Dr. David Lam suggested, how could we give early and suitable treatment to the elderly as soon as possible so they don't become severe cases? That's the first point. Second point, at AWE, many elderly patients have lost contact with their family members. It's been several days now. So Undersecretary, how do you allow family members to make calls, find out about the condition of their elderly family members at AWE? Many people don't know how they could make calls to reach their elderly. Third question is about bodies. I have received requests for assistance. In some cases, patients passed away at the accident and emergency department for 12 days. Family members still couldn't track the body. So, people lost contact with their family members. AWE, other family members also lost the bodies of their deceased. They don't know where to find the bodies. Now, how come it's so slow for the bodies to be processed? Undersecretary. I agree, of course, we should treat any disease at an early stage as far as possible. Now, say for proprietary Chinese medicine, it may help. And now we have some dedicated Western medication. The Chief Executive has already explained the progress of procurement, so there are new medications still available for the public. As far as I understand, the Social Welfare Department has never issued guidelines as to what medications are banned at homes. But of course, everyone has to be careful when taking medication. Now, say if someone is already on Western medicine, then should the person also take Chinese medicine? I think there's need to seek clinical advice. About family members reaching patients at AWE. I don't know if it's just the hospital authority facility. Well, it's the same for both types of facilities, but I can't tell one from the other. Okay, then we'll have to find out from both sides then. If people want to make calls to make inquiries, we'll find out what the channel is. No, we need a hotline, Undersecretary, a hotline, please. Maybe the venue provides a phone number for the patients, then that's one way. As for the venue management, they maybe we'll try to find out if there are any ways that are the easiest and the quickest for people to make these calls. So please work on that quickly. Now, if I may add, for the government departments, the Department of Health, the hospital authority, there is a mechanism. If there are cases of death, the police or the hospital, if someone passes away in the hospital will, of course, contact family members. But if these are death cases outside of hospital, the police will liaise with family members to sort out so federal arrangement could be made. As you know, in recent days, we've seen a surge in death cases. So the time taken may be longer than usual. We are in discussion with the relevant departments. Say if there's need to involve forensic scientists, of course, and things have to take longer. But then for the more straightforward cases, we would like to speed up the processing. And even if a case involves a forensic investigation, we'll see if there's any way to speed things up so family members would be informed of the situation sooner. Now, the police also has a mechanism for those involved to make inquiries about progress. And in any case, we will go back and discuss with the relevant departments, including the hospital authority, to see if we could put in place a mechanism to keep family members informed. Thank you. Now, questions from me. I always stress it's important that you act with precision. We're seeing more progress, indeed. For Chinese medicine and Western medicine, now you have one specific COVID medicine. It will take about 2 months for 150,000 doses to arrive in Hong Kong. Now let's first talk about the Western medicine. Now you have so far received delivery of about 50,000 doses for 5,000 patients. Have you included children in your calculation? Because I've received many requests for assistance about children. So do we have enough medication? Some professors have done all the statistics for me. So if you just assume 50,000 people will need the drugs, it's not enough. You have to cater for supply for 2 months, for 3,000. So is this just for the Western medicine? That's my first question. And it has something to do with the application of this emergency regulation. For the Western medicine and the PCM, we've been saying all along that they have similar efficacy. So I agree with the Undersecretary. It's all about medical consultation. That is the diagnosis of doctors. But maybe we could liaise with the patients. If someone wants to take Chinese medicine, then you should arrange for Chinese medicine practitioners to do remote consultation. Because these people are under quarantine, they can't leave home anyway. So it's for the people involved to make the decision, but there are others who may opt for Western medicine. So if that's the case, well, for us, of course, there are only so many we could help, but then we're talking about a huge number of people needing assistance. So would you say do online consultation? Some people may have certain conditions, they may need the consultation with a doctor. Then you could do that for those who want Chinese medicine, and for others who want to take Western medicine, they may want consultation too. So when you just distribute drugs, you should include a phone number and a channel for remote consultation. Then you would be able to come up with precise figures as to how much of the medication you need. You know, I've seen your anti-epidemic pack. There's just one box of PCM is not enough for a full course. So you have to work out precisely the quantity of drugs you need. Now you have hotlines. There's also remote consultation, but there is a huge demand now in the community. And then do you have an idea of the ratio of Chinese medicine you need? And have you found out about the actual needs of patients in the community? So you need to have a roadmap. Then at least you will be, you know what the next step is. Thank you. You covered a large range of issues. Do you have enough people? You say there are several thousands of Chinese medicine practitioners who are prepared to join this effort. So would you allow them to join your effort to set up a consultation hotline? You have a, you could perhaps have prepare a list. Maybe you could work with the Chinese medicine associations. Let me first say this. We're going to launch a support scheme, if I may give advance notice on that. This is a support scheme for COVID-19 patients in home isolation. There will be one free online Chinese medicine consultation, and there will also be free delivery of Chinese medicine. In the first stage, 20,000 patients could benefit from this scheme. And we will see if the scheme works well, then we will continue. Well, what's important is that people are able to call through. What about for Western medicine? Because I have helped liaise with others. Some people don't have family doctors. Some people prefer Chinese medicine, some prefer Western medicine. That's the case in Hong Kong. It's really their choice. So are you doing the same for Western medicine? That is, you provide online consultation, because people will then be assured when they take medication. Now for these COVID medication and so on, people could consult doctors. Now we have started providing the new oral medication at designated, and we are opening more designated clinics. So patients were able to ask doctors questions face to face. And then we also have the teleconsultation. Apart from face-to-face consultation, that means there's doctors in the hotline that can answer questions. There's a second way. Third way is that there are groups in the community that have launched phone consultation services of different scales. Now, with Chinese medicine, it seems that you have you're coordinating effort. I hope you're doing that. For Western medicine, if you could do the same, it will be useful, because then the public will, because they are at home in isolation in any case, so they will know where to call. They may not know where there are medical teams that could help them. So you have to provide all the information. But I mean, for me, I don't mind it, because some people may prefer Chinese medicine, some prefer Western medicine. So you have to make arrangement for either options, and then people will be more assured, and then we want people to take medication after consultation. Next, Mr. Tang Fei.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Now, we understand that the drugs from Pfizer and MSD will be prescribed to residents of care homes over 70 years old as a matter of priority, and those who are not completely vaccinated. The purpose is to prevent a mild case to become serious. But then it may then have the side effect of encouraging people not to receive the vaccines, because priority will be given to those who have never been vaccinated. Now, the drugs are not for serious cases and must be taken within 5 days of onset. Now, if we have young adults who are not in elderly care home, and if he seeks consultation at public hospitals, now will we face this embarrassment. He is a mild case, he is not a senior citizen, and then he is not qualified to be given the drug. And what if he becomes serious afterwards? Yesterday, it was reported by the media that the HA has made this announcement. Mainland medical teams in Hong Kong to support HA they are regarded as staff of the HA. Should there be any medical incident? Now, I'm a member of the Public Complaints Committee of HA. Now, if there is a complaint against a member of the mainland medical team, or the complaint goes to the Public Complaints Committee of the HA, or even to the board of the HA. Now, I think we should clarify this as soon as possible to avoid conflict between patients and doctors. While such conflicts are not common in Hong Kong, but not uncommon in the mainland, we have to prevent this from happening. It is good to give a statement that the mainland medical staff are regarded as HA staff when they are treating COVID patients in Hong Kong. Under Secretary, we will ensure that people who should be administered the drugs should be given the drugs if they so choose. We will continue to procure more drugs. If it is found that the demand is high, then we will continue to procure more. Secondly, vaccination is a very effective way to prevent serious conditions. And I think this piece of scientific evidence came much earlier than the scientific evidence for the effectiveness of the two drugs. WHO and experts have given very clear evidence that vaccination is a very effective way of preventing the disease. So I don't think this will be incentive for people not to be vaccinated and wait for administration of the drugs. Whether we are talking about a medical incident or a complaint, I think there can be various things leading to a complaint, and it's hard to quote to give an exhaustive list. So I think it will be decided later whether the HA or the cluster or the human resources will deal with that, or whether by the management of the relevant team. Because the extent and the nature differ from case to case, I'm sure there will be a procedure for handling such matters. Mr. Dennis Leung, thank you. Now, recently, there is this arrangement for civil servants to resume duties after the infection. They're just like ordinary members of the public. If on the 6th and 7th day of onset, they test negative by RAT, then they should resume duty. But civil servants are concerned. RAT may not be sensitive enough, or their methodology of testing may not be entirely correct. And what if it is a negative, a false negative? These are newly recovered civil servants may infect other colleagues if they get back to work too early. Now, we have received complaints that there was a civil servant tested negative after the 6th and the 7th day and returned to duty, and then he infected 6 to 7 colleagues as a result. According to WHO, even with 2 doses of vaccines, a person should only resume work 10 days after infection. unless there is another more sensitive test. So is it because the civil service is short-staffed? As a result, you have deviated from WHO's guidelines. And civil servants are concerned that if there is a re-negative and re-positive, and if it is not considered an infection, that is not fair, and this would affect the interception of transmission chains. The mainland uses RAT to identify cases followed by PCR to lower the chance of infection. So how do you address this to ensure public safety? Because the private sector will follow the civil service practice. Because healthy colleagues are worried that they may be infected by a newly recovered colleague. And then a recovered patient may return to work and they do not have a vaccine pass and they have to wait until wait for 180 days before they can get another dose. So how can you ensure that they can enter premises that require a vaccine pass? And I'd like to know cases confirmed before the 26th of February. When can they have a certificate to confirm that they've been infected? Undersecretary. Now, the CHB has discussed with the government a number of times on the definition of a confirmed diagnosis. We have many local experts to help us. The characteristics of Omicron are such that the incubation period is short and the viral load can drop very quickly in cases that are fully vaccinated. And so it is on that basis that the civil service has adjusted its policy. For repositive cases, the Department of Health, based on previous experience, has explained a number of times that for repositive cases, a PCR test would yield a positive result because it is highly sensitive. So this is because some residual virus is still within the body of a recovered patient. So according to the Department of Health, these people can move around freely in the community. Or they may be using public transport, they may go shopping, and so they are considered safe to the community. Because we have so many cases and around, so it is hard to pin down a particular source of infection. But taking into account the characteristics of Omicron, we come to the conclusion that a person tested negative by PCR on the 6th and the 7th day can be released. As regards how the vaccine pass can reconcile with the issue of a certificate, I think members have asked this question a number of times. For a newly recovered patient, there's no need to receive the 3rd dose. We will follow up and see how members of the public can be admitted to some premises. For those tested positive before the 26th of February, or everyone would have to go through the PCR test before they could be given an isolation order. Mr. Ben Chen and Ms. Rebecca Chen, and I saw a few hands. Second round, I will give you some brief moments, and then we will go to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. Because there have been updates in certain aspects, I would be lenient, but please come back to the emergency regulation as far as possible. If you have suggestions for the government to how further remove the constraints, feel free to let us know. Mr. Ben Chen. Thank you, Chair. Some Hong Kong residents are in the mainland because the epidemic has been with us for a long time. In the past, medicine could be sent back to them, but this service is no longer available. We are in another wave of outbreak, and we don't know when borders can be reopened. Can the government resume its mailing service for medication, while they can go to the Shenzhen hospital for medical follow-up, but not all of them are near the hospital. So can we send medication back to Hong Kong residents in the mainland? Now and besides, the Shenzhen hospital doesn't have a psychiatry department, so mental patients cannot come back to Hong Kong and they need medication. Can the government help in any way? A follow-up question from other members, and that is the use of Chinese medicine. We have new oral drugs manufactured by Pfizer and MSD. This is a welcoming sign because now there can be drugs for our patients. But then, according to Chinese medical practitioners, there are also effective Chinese proprietary medicine available in the mainland, but it takes time for them to be registered in Hong Kong. So if we have Chinese medical practitioners that know Chinese proprietary medicine suitable for treating COVID patients, can there be a fast-track registration channel for them? So that in addition to the 3 brands approved for the country, we can use other effective Chinese medicine as well. Will there be a mechanism to cater for these needs? Under Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for mentioning people stranded in the mainland and their need for medication. We will have to consider their needs and how we can follow up. I won't be able to give you an answer on spot, but I promise to think about it. Mr. Chen, I hope there can be a written reply. For sure. Thank you. Another question is about Chinese medicine. The 2 oral drugs for COVID and also the 3 brands or 3 types of Chinese proprietary medicine on the COVID treatment menu. They are mentioned in internationally acclaimed literature for treating COVID patients, and for others, we have to think about that. In 2020, we did send medication back to patients in the mainland. Perhaps you can refer to that practice.
Ms. Chen Hao-Yan. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask about the handling of bodies. Now, Ms. Wong tried very hard to give us an answer just now, but then with COVID-19 patients who passed away, there is still a huge backlog in the handling of bodies. We would like the administration to clarify a number of issues. Firstly, for those who passed away at the Accident and Emergency Department, if the cause of death is not known, and if it's not a case of natural death, is it the case that there is need for the magistrate to sign a death certificate before the funeral arrangement could proceed? How long would it take? Second question, could there be priority to handle bodies of COVID patients first? Because I have received requests from many. There's one case, the grandmother passed away, but to this date, the grandson still has not managed to obtain a death certificate because the lady passed away at the A&E department, so they have to wait for a ruling whether it's an unknown cause of death or whether it's a natural death or whatever, and then they have to wait at least 2 weeks. Still, they could not get the death certificate for burial. So it will only add to the pain and bereavement of family members is totally unacceptable. So does it really need to take so long? That's the first thing. Secondly, now family members of the deceased may approach the hospital or the mortuary or the police. Still, they could not get answers as to when they could proceed with the funeral arrangement. So could you set up a hotline to help them? Because I really want the government to move ahead of the virus. You want to save lives, but then at the same time, you're seeing there's an increase in death cases since the 28th of February. We've been seeing double digit of death cases, but instead, starting from the 1st of March, we are seeing hundreds of death cases, 100 in recent days is 260 plus cases and so on. So in the past 2 weeks, over 2,000 people passed away. So you can't say that just because many of the members are asking questions or you see photos and then you realize there's a problem. So why must we always see upsetting photos before you would try to find solutions? You can expect the death cases to remain at a high level. So there's a huge backlog. So you can't keep saying that, okay, we'll go back and see what we can do, because you should have known this or anticipated this. Under Secretary. Under the coroner's ordinance, there are certain legal requirements. There are over 10 different scenarios where there's a need to ask the coroner to decide on the cause of death. So if it's inevitable that coroners need to be involved, then how could we try to clear the backlog and not delay the issuance of the death certificate? We agree we need to deal with that. So we have to think about it because there's a huge bottleneck here. And then for a large number of cases, death certificates could not be obtained in a reasonable time frame. So we definitely have to follow up on that. And we'll see what can be done to, minimize the bottleneck situation. Can you tell us when will you give us an answer? Because really, family members can't wait that long. I think Ms. Diane Wong would like to say something. Yes, please. Thank you for the question. As you know, we're talking about cases that have not been admitted to hospitals. The patients were passed away at the accident emergency department, so they had to go to the mortuaries. And as explained, then there's need to involve the forensic for forensic determination of the cause of death. And as the member has pointed out, we have seen an increase in the number of death cases. That's why things are taking longer than usual. For the 1st of March case, please give us the information after the meeting, but I could explain the general procedure to you. As I said earlier, in the mechanism, the police would approach family members to arrange for them to identify the bodies and then proceed with the funeral arrangement. Now, so the member asked, instead of waiting for the departments concerned to approach them, if family members want to make inquiries, is there a channel for them to do so? So we'll go back and discuss this with the hospital authority. Now we would like to speed up the process. We are in close liaison with the sector, say with the transportation of coffins and so on. And we are offering assistance actually. So we hope as far as possible that funeral arrangement could be made as soon as possible. If members ask how long it would take for the process to be completed, well, the Department of Health will talk to the forensic division to see how they could speed things up. Perhaps we could provide information in writing late afterwards. Without death certificates, they cannot proceed with funeral arrangement. So it can't take 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Now, the Undersecretary said you will look into that. You have to tell us when you could answer this question of the family members of the deceased, so we could put it on record. When can you give us a reply? Now, they have to fill in the death cause form. And then once that form is filled in, they could book the cremation session. And then later on, the death certificate could be issued. So that's not the most urgent. The cause of death form is the most important. Well, yes, please give more details after the meeting, because people want to know what the roadmap and the time frame is. Please give more specifics. Next, second round, Ms. Elizabeth Court and Ms. Carmen Can. I'll give you 2 minutes each. I raised this question about the handling of bodies at the meeting of the Health Services Panel. A week ago, we received complaints from both parties. The family members complained it's a long way, or they couldn't find the bodies. It's really very saddening. And then for those handling bodies, the sector also encounters various problems. So the government can't say just because we have over 2,000 death cases, and each day we have over 200 death cases. Therefore, the government is still just saying, oh, we didn't know anything about that. You know, it can't be right. You have to compress the procedure so the public, the family members will know how long they have to wait, because this is extraordinary cases. We have to handle that in a special way. You can't just follow your usual routine. Otherwise, there will be more backlogs. And then yesterday, I sent protective gear and N95 masks to frontline workers who have to handle bodies. Now, they have to handle bodies of COVID patients, but they don't have enough protective gear, so they're very much concerned and worried. So you need to issue clear guidelines. And then for all frontline workers handling bodies, you have to offer them sufficient protective gear. Now, for bodies of COVID patients and non-COVID patients, will you put them in the same mortuary? And really, there are even high risks for those handling the bodies. And also, it's a more cumbersome procedure when they have to handle the body. So we will write to you again to explain these cases. We hope you will deal with that as soon as possible and give us a reply as soon as possible. You can't allow this to go on any longer. You have to give a clear explanation to the family members. Ms. Carmen Ken, Ms. Dan Wong, yes? If I may give a reply. For frontline workers of the funeral services sector, we attach great importance to the way they handle bodies. In 2020, together with the Hospital Authority and the Department of Health, we formulated the guidelines for the sector. Now we're in the 5th wave of the epidemic. On the 3rd of March, we arranged another webinar. We asked the Department of Health to explain to the sector how they should handle bodies of COVID patients properly. The sector, of course, is very much concerned about these issues as well. And we've asked epidemiological experts to explain things to the frontline workers and to answer the questions. And we have made an appeal to the sector to be properly prepared. They have to provide sufficient protective gear to the frontline workers. It's important. Well, how could they provide protective gear? We can't get hold of protective clothing and N95 masks. So that's what the sector told us. And that's why frontline workers approached me directly with without going through their bosses. And then we had to scramble to send them the gear. This shouldn't happen because you need to protect frontline staff, right? So you shouldn't just issue a guideline and ask them to sort it out on their own. We have already explained this matter to them. For individual cases, if you see any problems, please pass on the information to me and then we'll follow up with the sector. Please. Now, they can't buy the protective gear, so you have to give it to them. I'll follow up with you later because I can share with you an experience later. But first, I'll invite Ms. Carmen Ken to speak. Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, I'll talk about the question of indemnity when we go to 241N. But for CAP 599J, I have a legal question. Specified tests in 599J, CAP 599J, would it be just be limited to PCR tests when we conduct universal testing? So when we do universal testing, we could just rely on 599J, right? Now for rapid antigen test, positive RAT results are not accepted by the government as some evidence of confirmed case. So would you consider doing universal RAT? Because the chief executive mentioned that over a month ago. Now, as the government has already confirmed that RAT positive result could be the basis of a confirmed case, then would you consider adopting RAT in the place of, as a form of universal testing? Under Secretary. Now, my understanding, Madam Chair, under the different testing schemes, because we have launched different forms of testing schemes in the past, it will be specified as to the types of tests that are acceptable under a particular scheme. So for us to achieve the aims of the scheme. That's the first point. Second point, would RAT, well, RAT is used as it is now, but in future, would we use RAT in universal testing? Well, I don't have the information at this point. When the government announces the compulsory universal test, it will give all the details. Now, my question is, within the scope of CAP 599J and the definition of specified test, would it limit the test to just PCR because there are various requirements, specified doctors, specified tests, and so on? So when CAP 599J was drafted, was it the thinking a time that you were only thinking about PCR? So if we have to do universal RAT, do we need to revise, amend CAP 599J, or could we still rely on CAP 599J? That's really my question. Ms. Ken, please. We have to, let's see whether with the emergency regulation, we want a purposive approach or whatever, and we can consider it. Anyway, Under Secretary, do you have anything to say in response to Ms. Ken?
Oh, a specified test, must it be a PCR test? Can it be an RAT? I defer to my colleague. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Khan. Under 599J, the specified test doesn't specify a particular mode of testing. The test has to be conducted in relation to COVID 2019. Thank you. All right, I have a short follow-up. because I remember mentioning this in this meeting. We've got 19 members to encourage more volunteers to help residents of RCHEs afforded 500 sets of white PPEs that cover somebody from head to foot or to feet at about 1/3 of the cost of 1/3 of the regular price. The consignment has arrived. The question is, as mentioned by Ms. Quat, you don't tell us that you are going to have a webinar tomorrow, and then you ask the industry to go find those PPE. All we want is coordination and be focused. Now, we provide PPEs for our volunteers. We have a huge workload. The same applies to the funeral service sector. I think these are extra costs, to be honest. We don't want the figure to continue to rise. We want to contain the need for such PPEs. So we hope that we will have lesser use of such PPE. The central authorities have said that when it comes to supplies, you just put your request to them and they will try their best. Now, the funeral service sector has to wear PPE at work. I think you should speak out on their behalf so that for sure there will be supplies to them. The PPE, the white PPE I ordered is disposable for one-off use only. So the sector has to incur extra costs and they will have to source their own supplies, and it's so much more expensive to get them in Hong Kong. During ordinary times, you can ask the sector to do it in the market. But now the situation is dire. I'm not just talking about the funeral service sector. The same applies to residential care homes. Our volunteers are helping, and some social workers have approached us for such items. It's rather sad that even those in the elderly residential care sectors cannot procure such supplies. You have frequently told us the number of infections in RCHEs and also the need. And because the country is giving us staunch support in this fight, and if you put this request to the central authorities, they will for sure help. So, Under Secretary, if the volume of the quantity is large, then perhaps this is something you should consider. Under the emergency regulations, different sectors of the community need PPE, and PPEs are now indispensable. So we'll see. We'll ask around and see the needs of different sectors, and we'll explore the possibility of help. Please do not explore. You just speak out. All right. Let's go to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. Last time we were on clause 2, or whether there will be any exemption. I'd like to know whether you will have questions on that. I saw 2 hands. Is it related, Mr. Andrew Lam? I saw your hand. No, it's not directly relevant. Then can we move on to the next? I have a follow-up question, in fact. Now, because you haven't asked any question today, I will allow you to ask question first. Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on what you said. The Undersecretary's reply was still that the administration would consider or would follow up. Now we are talking about the need of supplies. They is just like food and a war. So the government hasn't got a full estimate of what is needed by different sectors of the community. For instance, the quantities of N95 masks or PPEs. I want to know whether the government has yet to conduct a full assessment of the needs from various sectors. I'd like to know whether there is any central coordination or departments and sectors doing their own estimate. Now, we have given full power to the CS4A under the regulation, but we do have a constitutional duty to know whether you are exercising that power and how. If you don't even know what you need, how can you ask the central authorities to help? That is the crux of the matter. If the government doesn't even know what it needs, no matter how hard, how eager the community and legislators are help, we need some coordination. I'd like to know the coordination of the government. Undersecretary, are you able to take this question? Of course, different bureaus and departments are involved in livelihood needs. So for sure, we have a network to compile the needs of different sectors. Now we have sectors that are business operations. They are not directly under the government. So for these sectors, we need more time to find out their demand. If there are sectors and personnel in the community indispensable in this fight against the epidemic, and if they have any need, we will follow up and see how we can help. We have to move on, but I hope the Secretary can help us to follow up. Members, some members wanted written replies for certain questions, and I also like to add mine here. We are now in a war. We should not just allow the market to fend for itself. By the time you respond, maybe the war is over and it's too late. So a number of members have said that you have to take a preemptive approach. Members have reflected various concerns to you. I'm sure you'll be able, or rather, we expect you to have accurate and rather focused figures. Now, the emergency regulation we are vetting is weapon for you to win the war. You need to be specific. We on the front line are telling you the inadequacies, and you must respond. It may be beyond your scope, but then we are vetting a number of subsidiary legislation, and I think it's not just from you. Even at press briefing or at press conferences, secretaries may ask us to pass on the case to you. In fact, those cases are typical of what's happening in the community, and you should follow up on how. Well, there was a case where you help to find a quarantine hotel room for a foreign domestic helper, but then we don't have only one case in the community. That's not the way you should work. We are here to speak out for the community. All right, any other question on Section 2? There are 5 subsections under Section 2. Exemption. Ms. Carmen Khan. Yes, Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you. I have 2 questions for Section 2. The first relates to Section 2, Subsection 1. The CS4A may grant exemption in the form of writing. How can the public be informed? How can LegCo monitor that the administration has put into full use this emergency regulation? I once heard a reply from the administration that it says for A would make clear if he happened to be interviewed. Now, if the CS4A has been asked to grant an exemption in writing, how can the public be informed in any way? And now for the subsections under Section 2, there is no mention of exemption from liability or immunity from any immunity. DOJ said that since there is exemption for statutory requirements, that means the related immunity would be granted. So you have just addressed the liability under the statutory requirements. For instance, if we use the example of drugs to illustrate it. Now, if you have a certain drug which is distributed by company A, granted by the manufacturer. Now, we are using this emergency regulation because we are in an emergency. So the 450,000 items of proprietary Chinese medicine from the central authorities have been granted exemption. So it's okay for those drugs. They don't have to be registered, and that doesn't involve the contractual relationship between companies A and B. But I'm worried that the scope may be too narrow. You should make it wider. The exemption should not just be from registration. Rather, if the CS4A has granted exemption to cover the whole brand, then the scope of exemption would be wider. It is not just about the Department of Health should destroy or confiscate such drugs or not. Please consider this possibility. You should see whether the regulation is wide enough to give us enough weapon in this war. So that if anyone or the CS4A relies on this section to act. Now, company B is the sole distributor. Company B cannot claim company A because 450,000 items have arrived with exemption, and then a voluntary organization has imported another 10,000, or a civic organization has imported 10,000. I'd like to know whether the scope of exemption is sufficient here.
Yes, Undersecretary. Madam Chair, I'm afraid I'm not a legal professional, so I can't really answer the question. Can I suggest this? Section 2 of this regulation is the most important. You could study it in further detail if you have time. Having heard Ms. Kan's question, I would like to make a suggestion for your consideration. Only those who are in that field would know about things in that particular field. So perhaps you could consider this. First of all, maybe the central authorities could help here. They want to help Hong Kong by sending us all these supplies, and perhaps they could help to check the quality of these items. Because from the medical point of view, of course, we want to ensure the quality of this medicine. Now, the central authorities have sent us a batch of 450,000 packets, so I'm sure they will check the quality. But for other Chinese medicine, maybe on the mainland, they also have certain standard to go by. Now you think it's maybe challenging because probably maybe the Department of Health does not have enough staff on Chinese medicine to deal with such issues. So maybe for you, the best thing is just not forget about it. And in that case, can you ask the central authorities to check and verify with a CHOP, for instance? But of course, you know, when the supplies from mainland arrives, voluntary groups may not know because there's so many layers if they are getting the supply from mainland. So maybe you can go back and study it. By that I mean, could the mainland help out, or could the Chinese medicine sector in Hong Kong tell whether the medicine available is of good quality or not? Because I think all of us only have a common wish, that is to win this battle. So I think if we just leave it to you, really, I'm sorry to say, very often you will just keep to the rules, and so if there's help from the central authorities, that's the best. Well, but maybe you say, okay, then we'll leave it to the central authorities to decide. There's one way to. I think what's important is that you're able to answer the questions of the public, or you leave it to someone who have the expertise. Because I cannot, you know, confirm if some medicines of good quality or not. So we'll leave it to the professionals. But I think the best thing is to make sure there is sufficient remote consultation service to see which is the best medicine for the patients. Madam Chair, can we ask the Department of Justice to respond to my two questions? The first question, that is the exemption in writing made by the Chief Secretary. How do we inform the public? And the public, of course, includes members. So we'll know where, then we could monitor whether this regulation is put to right use. Yes, I think the administration has to give us an answer. At the very first meeting, we said we wanted a progress report. But so far, with the requirement for license, authority approval, exemption, permit, registration, standard specification, we still don't see how you are dealing with that. So that's section 2, subsection 1, and then for subsection 2, section 2, subsection 2, E and F. E is about qualification or experience. And here, our guess is that you're referring to medical personnel. But maybe there are others too, you know, maybe engineers and so on. So you could give us a good progress report, and then the public will understand more and see that you're actually working hard to try to get more manpower. That's the first point. Second point, then people will know that as we fight this battle, many people need to be involved. Many are working very hard. It's not just healthcare workers. There are others, say the engineering sector, involved as well. So F, property, you know, the types of the category of properties or things. So who are helping? Maybe someone have made a contribution. Say they let you use their property, whatever. It's been, you know, some 10 days since this regulation has come into operation. So where have you put this regulation to use? Can you tell us? You know, we know you're using the regulation, but you are using it enough to meet the pressing needs. So you give us a progress report. Can I ask the clerk to follow up on that? And Department of Justice, anything from you, please? In response to Ms. Ken's questions, thank you. I agree that I can confirm that Ms. Ken's understanding is right. This is just some exemption in writing as to how we could enhance transparency. I think it's for the Bureau to respond. Under Secretary. Section 2, subsection 1. The Chief Secretary for Administration is to grant exemption. At the press conference held by the Chief Executive, there are various projects, construction projects giving exemption. For example, a medical support team coming to give support, the construction at the Lokma Child Loop, and so on. So the information will have to come from the Chief Secretary's office. There are channels for the relevant policy bureau and departments to respond to members' questions. Perhaps we could make use of these channels. So the relevant bureau, department, or the Chief Secretary's office could give you an answer. Under Secretary, could you follow up for us, please? Yes, no problem at all. Because it will help for the government to work with the public to win this battle, because the public will know that you have done so much, because now we don't. That's good for to enhance transparency. On the scope of indemnity, please study it. I mentioned an example. There are actually limitations to the indemnity that's offered now. Well, you could make use of this public channel to explain what you've done. Is really very important. It's about collaboration. If the public learn more, they will have better ideas, and members will also have better ideas. So please try to follow up for us. Maybe you have put the regulation to use in various aspects, but maybe we don't, but we only get fragmented information. So we don't have the full picture. On section 2, any more comments, please, from members? No? Section 3 then. Section 3, members, any comments? Under Secretary, anything else to add? Thank you, Madam Chair. We have nothing to add. It just says here, that if this is repealed, then it won't affect any other effect. That's all. Explanatory note. Anything from the Bureau? Can you explain that to us? Oh yes, the explanatory note is just to give a summary of the purpose of the objective of the regulation. Any questions, members? Madam Chair, on the explanatory note. I think it's clear here that the object of the regulation is to empower the Chief Secretary for Administration to grant exemptions from any requirement under any enactment for preventing, protecting against, delaying, or otherwise controlling the incidence of transmission of the coronavirus disease. So it's not just for mainland support measures. So there is no limitation to the scope. In other words, there's no restriction on the administration. So the explanation note makes that very clear. On section 2 about exemptions, I would like to propose certain weddings for the consideration of the government and the Department of Justice. How should I go about it? Well, I thank the Undersecretary for agreeing to consider it. Then you will see if we could revised wording so that there will be no restrictions whatsoever when we invoke this regulation. Perhaps the clerk could explain that. If individual members would like to suggest improvements to the wordings of a piece of subsidiary legislation so that it is more in line with our objective of fighting epidemic, then what can members do? Clark, can you please explain that? Yes, Madam Chair. Members could write in to us, and then we will pass it on to the administration for consideration, and then a response will be given to the subcommittee, and so you know the position of the government then. What if the subcommittee would like to propose changes to the wordings? Now, if we receive the response of the administration and the subcommittee considers the need to further revise the wordings, then we may need another meeting. But of course, it really depends on how the administration will respond to that. If the administration agrees to change the wordings, then it's fine. Otherwise, the subcommittee will have to consider what to do next. So first, we will have to see what the administration's response is. Now, so far, it is proposal made by Ms. Carmen Ken. Other members will have to study your suggestion too. So can we do this? Can you send your proposed amendments in writing, and it will circulate to the members of the subcommittee, because we have to study very carefully the possible effect of the revised wordings, and then we'll let the administration consider your proposal and see what their response is. I will follow up on this issue after today's meeting. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Clerk. But that it won't affect the commencement of the regulation. Well, the regulation has come into operation already. The regulation is in operation because it's a matter of public interest. So it's mentioned in 22G. So if it's for public interest, so the regulation could commence. So that's why it's a purposive approach under the broad principle of fighting the epidemic. So the various powers under this regulation could be exercised. Explanatory note. There's mention of public conveyances. And other powers for mandatory measures and so on. I well, my personal view is that there's no need for us to narrow the scope of the regulation. We could leave it as wide as it is, but we must make sure the government puts the regulation to full use. Now, Ms. Carmen Quen questioned whether the way the regulation is worded, it could allow extensive use because there's so many other parties involved that that's her concern. I think we could look into that, okay?
So if you have any proposals, do submit them in a bilingual format. All right. If there are no other comments, then we will end the scrutiny of this emergency exemption from statutory requirements, COVID-19 regulation, legal notice 23, and we await written replies from the administration so we can report to the council for the benefit of the public. Now we move on to the next, that is CAP 599I. Administration, please explain to us. Thank you. This is the last regulation. Under CAP 599I, prevention and control of disease, wearing of mask regulation. So there is announced on the 24th of February 2022 and took effect on the same date. And the amendments contain the following three areas. First, when carrying out strenuous activities in public place, well, this exemption is now granted. And also MTR paid areas, the defense for not wearing a mask is also removed. And the last, to tally CAP 599I and 599I, that is the prevention and control of disease specified premises regulation. Now we've extended the need for wearing of masks to all premises under CAP 599I F. All right. Section 2. In light of the amendment we're proposing, we will change the definition of public space. We're going to remove does not include a public transport carrier or an MTR paid area. And we also like to cover any CAP 599F premises. And we've also given a definition of what is CAP 599F direction and CAP 599F premises. Is it okay for me to go on? And then in section 4, that is a defense for not wearing a mask if a person needs to eat or drink in a paid area of MTR. Now we have removed eat or drink. This is because of our amendment to CAP 599I in section 2. Now we have covered 599F premises in 599I, and therefore the requirement to wear mask in specified public place during specified period, where we have added CAP 599F premises as well. So in 5A, the heading has got CAP 599F added in subsection 1, and also D and H and I, we have made consequential amendments or corresponding amendments. Well, you mentioned 599F a number of times. I have checked 599F premises are listed here. Item 17, private premises that satisfy the following are not private premises, and public entertainment premises. Double negative is used for item 17. And then 18, 19, self-explanatory. Private premises, not private premises. And what are the implications here? So you are using 599F. Item 17 of 599F premises. The activity premises, places open to the public for indoor activities. To cater for the nature of these premises, so private premises have not been included. And public entertainment places are also taken out because it is a separate item under item 5. It's regulation as a separate type of emphasis. We do not want to duplicate, and so we have excluded this here. I know that you have to wear a mask when doing physical exercise or doing sports. Now, people have their own clubs in a residential development. Residents or maybe doing Tai Chi in a private clubhouse in his own residential development. Is it all right for him not to wear a mask? Under Cap 599I, we regulate 3 types of premises. First, public transport carrier or an MN, an MTR paid area. Second, specified public places. And third, Cap 599F premises. Public place means any place to which for the time being the public or section of the public may or permitted to have access, whether on payment or otherwise. So the place you refer to should not be under Cap 599I. So although it is outdoor, but is for residents only, then it's not a public place, right? Yes. Because I have seen an elderly person doing Tai Chi at a certain corner of a private garden. So I just want to clarify. Members of the public do not have access into the premises, generally speaking, but of course, sometimes they are visitors. And then section 4 of 599I, have you got to that part? Subsection 3, E. The person is not wearing a mask in order to do any of the following acts. You have deleted eat or drink. Can you clarify? Before you do so, I have to extend the meeting by 15 minutes, all right? Now, subsection 3 is referring to reasonable excuse for not wearing a mask. Now, before we make this amendment, there are 3 circumstances under which a person can be masked off. The first is to eat or drink. Second, to take medication. 3, to maintain personal hygiene. For instance, if a person has sneezed and he has to clean himself, then it is a reasonable excuse for him to remove his mask. Here we remove eat and drink here because we have received many complaints that in some public transport carriers, people have been using eating or drinking as an excuse to keep their mask off. And that has created difficulties for frontline staff of public transport carriers, conflicts with passengers. So we want members of the public to comply with the wearing of mask regulation. So we have taken away eat or drink as a reasonable excuse for not wearing a mask. Now, for instance, if you go to a bank and you go to a post office, you are asked to remove your mask so that they can verify your identification. Is that a reasonable excuse? I don't think people should still stick to this conventional way of identification given the epidemic. But I have once tried to apply for a permit and I was asked to remove my mask in an air-conned environment, not in an open area. So is that allowed? Please refer to 5A. Now, 4 is about public transport carrier. 5A under 3G. Now we have a reasonable excuse. It is reasonably necessary for the person not to wear a mask for such verification of the person's identity as reasonable necessary for business purposes. So there is a reasonable excuse here. Any question? Section 5, all right. 5A, yes, 5A. So apart from specified public place, we have added Cap 599F premises, and we've also amended 3K. The person is engaged in any physical activity in a place that is not indoor. Again, this is removed. So if anyone engages in physical activity outdoor, he's required to wear a mask. And then we have a corresponding deletion of subsection 5 because there is no longer the need for a definition of indoor. Indoor is mentioned in the reasonable excuse. But the definition of 599F is already mentioned. You're referring to K, right? Physical activity, yes. Deleted. Any question? If not, 5 capital letter B. All right, 5 capital B, you have covered that.
For 5 capital B, well, with a 599F, where we have reference premises. So here we have corresponding amendments. So apart from specified public place, we also have to include Cap 599 premises, so that these provisions would apply to specified public place as well as Cap 599F premises. So you've cross-referenced Cap 599R 5 premises, right? Yes, we just want to include, explain, define the scope of application, and that would include Cap 599F premises. So that's all for the marked up or the amendments to the regulations. Thank you. Say for bracket C, bracket 4C is the relevant place, right? Yes. For bracket 4, bracket C, to add the premises or such place or premises, we're adding that. That's all. Perhaps we could also look at the English version. a quick look. Any comments, please, members, on the English version? If members do not have any specific comments, so we have completed scrutiny of CAP 599I, Prevention and Control of Disease Wearing of Mask Amendment Regulation 2022. That's LN 24. I don't see any members raising their hands. So I suppose you all endorse this. So we have completed the scrutiny of 6 pieces of subsidiary legislation in total. But we very much hope the Undersecretary would follow up on the various issues we've raised. And it's hope that with your follow-up, then the public will learn. More about the powers given to the administration under these various pieces of subsidiary legislation and how these powers could facilitate your work to fight the epidemic. So this is a good opportunity for you to coordinate the reply of different departments, and because there's something that we really want to learn about. If you encounter any difficulties, perhaps we could also approach the Chief Secretary for Administration for follow-up. But we would hope rather that you would coordinate this effort, because only you are attending our meeting here, and we have put all our questions to you. So please, first, we'll ask you to take this up, and you could keep in close liaison with this subcommittee. Let's see if you could obtain the information that we need. If you can't, then we'll see if we will approach the relevant bureau or office instead. So that's how we'll take this further. Now, can the Secretary tell us more about the legislative timetable? Yes. Madam Chair, tomorrow you're going to move a motion to extend the scrutiny period of LNs 12 to 15 of 2022 at the council meeting. And if the motion is passed, then the 4 pieces of subsidiary legislation together with the other 2 LNs we consider today, then the legislative timetable will be as follows. The deadline will be for amendment would be the 6th of April council meeting, and then the deadline for giving notice of amendment would be the 29th of March, and we plan to give a verbal report to the House Committee on the 25th of March. And then we plan to submit a written report to the House Committee on the 29th of March, Tuesday. So that's the timetable. And if members wish to speak on these items, then at the council meeting on the 6th of April, you could do so. If there is nothing else, I would adjourn the meeting now. I would like to thank our members, the Secretariat, the Undersecretary and his team, as well as the Department of Justice colleagues for attending the meeting. As the chairperson of this subcommittee, I hope that for these 6 pieces of subsidiary legislation, the administration will provide us with more detailed and precise information. And then members would have more precise information to go by if we want to follow up on any issues. Thank you. So that's the end of the work of the subcommittee here but the Secretariat will follow up on the written response. Thank you very much. Thank you.